All right. Welcome back, everyone, to Calling All Men. We are here confronting the crises facing our boys and men, our sons, our brothers, our fathers. And in this episode, we're going to get a really deep perspective on the nature of this crisis. And so I invite you to just imagine that you're here with us, pull up a seat, maybe welcome in your brothers, your father, your sons, at least take them into your heart. We're going to talk about the crisis of our boys and men today, and we're going to have a special emphasis on fathers. Our next guest, points to the lack of father involvement, and he talks about the epidemic of dad-deprived boys. And just to, along those same lines, there's many son-deprived dads out there, many dads who've been disconnected from their sons. The statistics, I'll let my next guest tell us about some of the statistics and, how lack of father involvement is a huge predictor of things like suicide and dropping out of school. It's really been astounding to me as I've put together this summit to learn just how critical father involvement is in his son's life, in his children's life in general, but even especially in his son's life. So our next guest, I think we can think of as the patriarch of our gathering here, not just because of his age, he is an octogenarian, but he's also for decades been standing up for human beings. And he's known by many of the men that I interviewed for this summit as a kind of godfather in the men's movement, someone who has been simply standing up for men and fathers and boys, defending their honor, reminding us why we need fathers, why we need men. And so it's an honor for me to welcome him. Dr. Warren Farrell, who many of you probably already know, is the author of The Boy Crisis with author John Gray. He has presented its causes and solutions worldwide, from the White House to the Norwegian Parliament. The Boy Crisis book inspired the Fatherhood Crisis bill signed into law by Florida's Governor DeSantis in 2022. That was something I didn't know. Dr. Farrell's been chosen by the Financial Times as one of the world's top 100 thought leaders. His books are published in over 50 countries and 19 languages. They include the New York Times bestseller, Why Men Are the Way They Are, and international bestseller, The Myth of Male Power. Warren has been a pioneer in both the women's movement, elected 3 times to the board of the National Organization for Women in New York City, and the men's movement. Warren has been interviewed by Oprah, Barbara Walters, Peter Jennings, Katie Couric, Larry King, Charlie Rose, and now by me. Dr. Farrell, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So, as I've been exploring the crisis facing our sons, our brothers, our fathers, our boys and our men, I've encountered a number of people who dismiss it and say, for example, oh, it's just the patriarchy. It's just the patriarchy. This is why boys and men are suffering. And, I noticed in one of the podcasts I was listening to with you on it, you made a connection between the term patriarchy, as it's often used now, as kind of just this general label for everything that's wrong in our world. You made a connection between that and boys being dad deprived. So I wonder if you could, yeah, say more about that, and also kind of give us your maybe a broad scope assessment of the crisis facing boys and men.
Yes. Well, to take off on the word patriarchy, we often hear from feminists that the world is dominated by a patriarchy that made rules to benefit men at the expense of women. And that's a really mistaken analysis. The world was dominated not by a patriarchy per se, it was dominated by the need to survive. And to survive, our grandparents did not even think about rights and think about, they thought about obligations, they thought about responsibilities. And what happens when men, what we in the feminist movement did, and because of my background on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City, I also sort of took on this patriarchy thing of, and men earn more. But when I started looking into it, I wrote a whole book on this one statistic, which is the belief that men earn more than women for the same work, and found out that it was not at all true, that men do earn more than women, but it's for 25 different decisions that men make, each of which leads them to make more money, but each of which leads women to have better lives, but more balanced lives, which are usually better lives. And so back to this patriarchy. So the world was not dominated by a patriarchy. It was dominated by the need to survive. And to survive, men and women in most cultures chose to survive by doing roles. Women's role was raise children. Men's role was raise money. Women risked their lives giving birth. Men risked their lives protecting women and in war, and protecting the children that women bore. And so both sexes lost their lives fairly equally. Men, if in times of war, men more so, other times a little bit less so, until the last 50 to 80 years. And during that period of time, we got better with childbirth, and women's lives were not as much at risk in childbirth, and we got much. But men's lives were still the ones that went to war, and they were still the ones that traditionally, until recently, took the jobs that earned more money, and that were more hazardous. And so even today, in 2023, men still die in hazardous jobs they die in the workplace at the 93% level. And so when we hear men getting paid more, we don't subtract for the hazardous jobs. Men are beginning to get paid more as truck drivers now than they used to, and as dock workers, and where we need them as construction workers, because they're willing to risk their lives in the process of doing that. And so I didn't realize when I was on the board of NOW that that what happens is the pay gap is not between men and women. The pay gap is between fathers and mothers. And when men and women become fathers and mothers, that's when the woman is more likely to cut back on her work, and the man is more likely to increase his work. So today, when women and men have children, 40% of those women work full time. 40% of the women do not work outside the home at all, just inside the home, and 20% work part time. But of the 40% that work full time, most of those women cut back to close to 35, 36 hours a week. And the men increase their amount of work. And the men also give up something very important. They give up what makes them happy, what fulfills them. So fulfillment jobs like being a musician, being an artist, being a writer, being an actor, being an elementary school teacher. These are all things that fulfill many, many men and many, many women very deeply. But when men have become fathers, they often say, okay, the elementary school teacher doesn't get paid enough. I've got to become principal. I've got to become superintendent of schools. And usually these fathers that love being elementary school teachers or musicians or artists or whatever are not very interested in being administrators. They're not very interested in working 365 days a year. They're not interested in all the complexities of parents banging at their door saying they're wrong, the students saying something else, the teachers saying something else, another administrator saying something else, and the mayor saying something else, and them being caught in the middle of that. That stresses them out. But men, when they become fathers, they give up what they want to do what they need to do, to give their children opportunities that they would love to have had themselves, but they don't have themselves once they give up those things. So when I was at school, I started getting recognized by the head of the Modern Language Association as a very good writer, and the and so I started to talk about the possibility that maybe when I got my doctorate, I would write. And my father said, very bluntly to me, he said, Warren, the, men have a responsibility. They have an obligation. If you're going to be a writer, about only 1 in 100 writers find a publisher, and the average book only earns about $5,000 a year. And so you're not going to be able to support a family and be a good husband and a good father on $5,000 a year. So stop fantasizing. Yes, you're a good writer, but this is not the way to make a living. This is not the way to be a responsible man. And so when I finally was able to do that, and then I started teaching courses on, my father said to me, he didn't speak for a few days that he was visiting me, and I confronted him, and I said, what's happening here? You're just talking about yourself, not about me. And he said, well, I want to keep our relationship good. And I said, well, you don't keep a relationship good by not talking honestly with somebody. Long pause. And he goes, well, you really want me to be fully honest? And I said, yes, Dad. I may not like what I hear, but I'd rather have that than a false communication or no communication. He said, you're teaching psychology all around the world here, and I think you're ruining the lives of millions of people. And I must say that threw me back, and I turned it into a joke at first and said, I don't really think I'm reaching millions of people, Dad. They just turn the TV on, turn it off. They're ironing or doing something else while they're watching the TV. Tried to make light of it. And then I said, but seriously, tell me why. And he goes, because what you're teaching all these people is psychology, and psychology teaches people to do what they want to do. A real man doesn't do what he wants to do, Warren. He does what he needs to do. He does what he has to do. He does what makes his children's life better, what makes his wife's life happier and safer. That's what a real man does. And this, not only did I miss the message apparently, which deeply disappointed him, but we in the feminist movement missed that message. We missed that that this patriarchy, this supposed dominant group, was forfeiting doing what we loved to do, because fulfilling occupations by and large earn less. And doing what you need to do, working on computers, working as an engineer, doing things that are not usually entertaining for people. My father was an accountant. I was gifted in math, but I just didn't feel accounting was very interesting. So I just didn't even go with my real gifts, and I just went with what I felt would be enjoyable for me. And my father was really upset with me for quite a while, until I said to him, and this didn't change it completely, but I said to him, Dad, it was your generation that freed my generation. You took care of survival. You took care, we grew up in middle class. I didn't have to worry about that like you did. He was born in 1910 and went through 2 world wars and a depression. And surviving was very important to him, especially as a man. But what I did get from that whole thing is that I had totally misinterpreted what masculinity was about. I took that extra money that superintendent of schools was making, and I believe the feminist belief system that because the men were more likely to be superintendents of schools, even when men were in education, they ended up dominating it and taking it over as part of the patriarchy. And so, as opposed to, we ended up doing the things that we really didn't care to do nearly as much in order to be able to do the things that our family needed. And that was what we accepted as the role of a man. Now, does this mean the role of a man was worse than the role of a woman? Not necessarily. But it meant that both sexes were doing what they felt they needed to do. Women were raising children, men were raising money. And so have always been in favor not of a women's movement blaming men or a men's movement blaming women, but a gender liberation movement freeing both sexes from the rigid roles of the past to more flexible roles for the future. However, what's happened in the last 50 years is that we've done a great job freeing women, saying, "You go, girl, be whatever you want to be, and whatever you want to be, you got our support, and you have our federal aid, and you have our a book of scholarships, federal scholarships that is this thick, as opposed to the book of scholarships for men, which is like that thick. It doesn't exist, and for men exclusively. And so this was what my mistake was, and unfortunately, in the last 40 years, 30 years in particular, especially since hashtag Me Too, we've only heard the woman's side of the story. I'm very much in favor of hashtag Me Too because I think it's very important for anybody to express their feelings. And this is the way that women saw the world. It's important for other women to feel supported if they see it that way. And it's important for men to understand that. However, the mistake was that hashtag Me Too is a monologue, not a dialogue. Men have the experiences of feeling that what they wish to be, that they bought into a whole belief that if I get higher on the ladder of success, I will be more of a man, without asking myself the question, is this what I really want to do? So we made ourselves not into human beings, but into human doings. And and to be a human doing and feel that you're not worth anything if you lose your job, but because nobody really values you as a person, this is not becoming a human being. And so this is the huge mistake about the assumption of patriarchy as being a male privilege. Men died sooner. Men were made to be the disposable sex. We earned more money because to support our families, and we only earned more money when we supported our families. Most artists, many artists in our history and as philosophers, they were gay. They were same-sex people because they didn't have to spend the time earning money to support their families. They could take more risks. They could be artists.
Yeah, very interesting. So yeah, what do you make of, because it's been decades since you came out with The Myth of Male Power and your book about the gender pay gap, but yet it persists like dogma throughout the mainstream media today. Perhaps people are even more sure of it than before. And to question it, to even invite a nuanced conversation of it gets real blowback. And well, you must be some, woman hating, toxic, masculine person. What do you make that things like the gender pay gap and this continuing to label the system that all of us often struggle under, the patriarchy, um, and how do you connect that to the increase in boys being dad deprived?
Yes, they run down two different paths there. Um, the So first of all, it's been very hard. I really had to when I was speaking on behalf of women's issues around the world. I, got standing ovations. I got awards. I got applause. It's in every, all the People magazine and, Parade magazine, and everything was writing me up. I was, constantly on Oprah and the Today Show and so on. And so those were all nice, both in terms of economic security and also in terms of feeling that what I said had an impact. But as soon as I started to question that, and say that let's also look at, and I never said let's not look at women's issues, and let's not be concerned about what my two daughters are experiencing in life and that type of thing. So I never had that perspective, never will have that perspective. But as soon as I wanted to be inclusive of men and boys, this group of people, particularly the ones that were in favor of diversity, equity, and inclusiveness, suddenly started to feel that diversity, equity, and inclusiveness meant everybody except men. In fact, the White House in the United States has a gender policy council. This is a gender policy council. When I was a kid, gender was at least two genders, men and women, or more than that. But the Gender Policy Council explicitly states that it's concerned with the issues of women and girls, not men and boys, which means, from a diversity standpoint, not black males, not gay males. So it is, in my opinion, racist and homophobic, and not Hispanic males, just women and girls. And so not only is it sexist, but it's opposed to diversity, it's opposed to equity, it's opposed to inclusiveness. And this to me is like mind-boggling. And it's not that this has been done unconsciously. I've talked to Jen Stein, who's the head of the Gender Policy Council that is only for women and girls, many times. And she just will not budge on the issue. Richard Reeves, who wrote Of Boys and Men, has also spoken with her. She won't budge on the issue. And so she has information from people like Richard Reeves and myself that boys and men are not, and fathers are not being included, and just refuses to even see it, and say, oh, yes, they are being included, when the language and the entire program excludes boys and men, and makes, it takes, aspects of when we had COVID, it takes aspects of that where women are more vulnerable in about 1/10 of the ways of measuring it, and ignores the other 9/10 of the ways of measuring it where men and boys are more vulnerable. And so this is deeply sad to me. And it also has meant that we haven't, therefore, looked at the underlying, we haven't looked at the world from the perspective of we're all in the same family boat. When only one sex wins, the other sex loses. And you see this in college admissions in the United States today, and in other countries as well, where the admissions, the New York Times headline ran, there's now affirmative action for men in college. Who's left out? The women. Now let's take a look at that in reality. Colleges are beginning to, they're graduating now 60% men, 40% women. But I'm sorry, 60% women, 40% men. And the men, when they get into college, are failing at a much higher rate. And so it's predicted that in 3 or 4 years, the ratio of male to female college graduates will be about a 2-to-1 ratio of female versus male. Okay, so so therefore, the colleges are hearing that women are choosing schools where there isn't such a ratio of twice as many females as males, because they're interested in getting potentially married and having a future father who is a college graduate like they are. Women who are college graduates do not go hunting around for men who are dropouts. This is not the way women choose future fathers. So the colleges are having to understand that giving affirmative action to men is a woman's issue, because the women want more men. Because when only one sex wins, both sexes lose, and women are feeling the loss of men who are also getting college degrees, and understandably so. And so this is because women still don't say, I'm a college graduate. I'm earning $200,000 a year. I'd like to find a man who's earning nothing, but he'll be a good father. And so
It seems like a hard problem to solve if you don't acknowledge that the problem is even there, right?
Well, not only not acknowledge that the problem is even there, but as the New York Times did, frame the problem as discrimination against women because we're now having affirmative action for men without understanding that we're having affirmative action for men because women want it in this area. And because they want equal numbers of men, because they're at a disadvantage when there aren't equal numbers of men. I went to an undergraduate school that was, 2-to-1 female to male, and I loved it.
Um, let me come back to this question of like a connection to lack of father involvement. And perhaps this is a connection that I was drawing as I was listening to your podcast, but obviously the, fatherlessness is on the rise across, different ethnic backgrounds. And this is a dire problem for boys. First, let's talk about that. What is the impact of um, boys being dad deprived? Maybe talk about what dad deprived means beyond fatherless, and then what is the impact on boys?
Yes, I use the word dad deprived because first, there is no such thing as a fatherless person. We all have biological fathers, and second, I created dad deprived as a concept because I wanted people to feel the deprivation, and that's what's happening. Um, and the and so and here's the basic evidence. So first, when I first drew up the proposal for the boy crisis and sent it to my publisher, I had 10 probable areas of the boy crisis, and I was going to do a part of the book on each of those causes of the boy crisis. Causes like maybe a lack of teachers and male teachers in school, and especially in elementary school, and so on. The things in the water that was creating the phthalate leaching in rivers and streams and lakes, and the phthalates that leach from plastics leading to stimulating estrogens rather than testosterone, to the point that smallmouth fish ended up not having male genitals anymore. They were creating eggs rather than sperm, even though they were male fish, and so those are things that are contributors to a number of aspects of it. But each time I looked at all these other causes or quote causes, I realized that they were all contributors, but that by far and away, the boy crisis resides where dads do not reside. And so I started seeing one connection after the other until I realized two things. One was that there's about 70 different nightmares that a parent would experience when the child is dad deprived. That those nightmares, like suicide, like depression, like addiction, like dying from overdoses of drugs, like addiction to cocaine and fentanyl and addiction to video games, addiction to pornography, lack of motivation in school, lack of postponed gratification. These were all connected to dad deprivation. They were connected for both girls and for boys, but they were the problem was much deeper for the boys than the girls. Both girls and boys who were dad deprived didn't do as well academically on average, but boys were far more likely to drop out of high school. And then when they dropped out of high school, they were far more likely to be unemployed in their 20s. and they're far less likely if they manage to get into college to drop out of college. They're much more likely, even if they finish high school, to not go to college. And so, yes, what are some causes of that? One is a lack of male teachers. One is a lack of recess, which we've cut back on recess. Another is a lack of vocational education. And I can make a good case for all of those things. But I was finding that increasingly, that if the boy was raised at home with a single mom, and he didn't have the girl with a single mom, at least she had a same-sex role model. At least when she had her period and she was bleeding and something embarrassing was happening, she could talk to her. At least she had social permission to express her feelings. The boy, if he began to masturbate in the bathtub and didn't like what came out, he couldn't talk to his mom about that. He may not, and he didn't even have much permission to talk to his dad, but he didn't because part of the problem with masculinity is the lack of permission to express feelings and fears and anything you're worried about, and that's a major deprivation for boys across the board. While the girls and boys were both having more problems in school and motivation and lack of postponed gratification and addictions to virtually everything, the boys were having those more intensely. And so the the girls were more likely to commit suicide, but the boys were much more likely to commit suicide. And the suicide rate, just to give you an example, is equal for boys and girls at the age of 9. Very few boys or girls commit suicide at the age of 9. But as testosterone and the male role sets in, a boy without a father, in particular, was more likely to be among the boys for whom the suicide rate went from equal to twice as great as girls between the ages of 10 and 14, and then 4 times as great as girls between the ages of 14 and 19, and 5 times as great as girls between the ages of 20 and 25. And and the single biggest predictor of suicide is dad deprivation. And one of the reasons for that, then part of the next sort of mystery I had to solve. So I'll take it. So the boy who grew up in a single mother home and went to a school that was basically all female teachers was left with no male role model to respect. So he is much more vulnerable to the male role models of drug dealers or gang leaders saying, you don't have a family, we'll bring you into our family, and just in order to and we'll give you respect because you don't have respect. And so just just knock off these people or rob these people, and you'll be part of our family. You have to prove yourself. Or they were much less likely to be motivated, not graduate from high school. And so a drug dealer would say, listen, you'll never find a girl if you don't have a car, if you don't have money, can't take her out. Deal these drugs just once or twice, and you'll get some more money. We can pay you much more than flipping hamburgers at $14 an hour. So just go ahead and do this. So the temptation was there. He was more likely to accept that because he didn't have the father that created the postponed gratification, which is the single biggest predictor of success in life. And he didn't have that postponed gratification. My next question to myself was, why? What do dads do that's so different from what moms do that lead us to having children, both girls and boys, do so much better if they have both a mother and a father as opposed to just a mom in the family?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the stats were often, if I understand correctly, boys did just about as well if they only had their father as they did in a mother and father home. Is that correct?
It's close to correct. They did actually slightly better if they only had their father than if they only had their mom, because the dads were more likely to bond with them without interference. So, for example, but the important thing is the people who did really well. I mean, the difference between children raised by fathers versus mothers is a difference, and it's statistically viable, but it's relatively small compared to the difference between people who are raised in single parent homes versus two parent homes. Especially if those, I mean, if you really want to do the best by, if let's say you're in the audience now and you're divorced, and you say, Warren, this is really nice and sweet, but I'm already divorced. So what do I do? And if you, in the Boy Crisis book, I have a chapter called the 4 must do's if you're divorced, and the 4 must do's are that you must have, if you want the best for your children, if you want the best for your children, you must have about an equal amount of time with father and mother. Number 2, the dad and mom need to live within about 20 minutes drive time from each other. Number 3, the children or a child needs to not be able to pick up any signs of bad mouthing or rewards for saying something negative about the father or the mother, the other parent, because the child is half the other parent. When you're criticizing the other parent, from the child's perspective, you're criticizing that half of the child that is the other parent biologically, genetically. And number 4, that the parents are both seeing a relationship counselor or a couples communication counselor about not just for emergencies, but consistently. It can be as little as once a month, but where it creates the couple's communication allows the mother and father to see the best intent of the other parent, and to be more likely to be willing to work with the other parent. Whereas if you have just an emergency counseling that you go to, the emergency usually creates a time crunch, and the time crunch usually leads to the father and mother both arguing for their outcome to be granted. And so the father and mother tend to see the worst of the other parent, and still remain in argument mode. And that's the last thing you want to learn if you're a divorced parent, is how to argue. You need, which is why the court system is absolutely the last place that people should be in if they're divorced.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we see a lot of boys not wanting to leave home, staying at home much longer. They're dropping out of the workforce or not entering the workforce, um, avoiding the sacrifices that men used to be honored for. And I see a connection between kind of shaming everything wrong with the world as men or patriarchy, um, and including, the persistent propaganda like the gender pay gap, which just provides fuel to prove, see, men are no good, and the fact that they won't acknowledge the gender pay gap, this just shows toxic masculinity, and it's like this big circular thing. But what boy wants to become a man in a world where men are seen as the root of all evil,
Yeah.
essentially?
Yes. And sometimes when you write and you get into this, you want to make sure, or at least I want to make sure, that what I'm writing is about reality. And this is has happened in a number of different ways, but this way was quite humorous. I was being filmed on one of these on this topic, and we were in the middle of right by a waterfall, and there was this young man that I was talking about, just exactly what you said about high school kids and junior high school kids hearing all these negative messages about toxic masculinity and patriarchy and male privilege and so on. And so and this fellow was walking by, who looked like he was in high school, and he was. And I said, and he looked, at the film crew and stuff like that, and I could see that he was very interested in what was happening. I don't think he could overhear me. So I said to him, I asked the film crew to stop filming, and I said, excuse me, are you in high school? And he goes, yes. He said, I said, do you want to talk? And if you with me about some of the things that I'm talking about, which is about boys and men and high school and male female relations. And he goes, a little bit, he was a little hesitant. I said, anything that you don't want to, anything we talk about that you don't want used, just tell me and we'll cut that. And I asked the camera crew if they were in agreement. They said yes. And still a little shocked that I'm even asking him to come into the play. And I said, listen, if I'm wrong and this boy says what's happening in school is different from what I'm saying, we want to know that. And the camera crew again looks a little bit like, all right, sure, yeah, that's exactly what we want to know. And so he comes down and I said, do you have a girlfriend by any chance? And he said yes. And I said, what do you learn in school about boys and girls? And he said, well, actually, I go to a private all boys school. And I said, oh, all right. So thinking to myself, well, this will be one where there's much more positive messages about boys. And he said, well, I learned that, boys are toxic. There's toxic masculinity, that we have male privilege, that we live in a patriarchal world. And that it's, that basically, you go girls and, the guys earn more than women and have all these things that for the same work and have all these, privileges. And I said, do you feel that that's true? And he goes, I actually, I don't really feel that that's true. And so I said, well, so when you and your girlfriend talk about this, what does she say? He goes, I wouldn't talk about this to my girlfriend. I said, well, how long have you known your girlfriend? And he said 4 or 5 months. And I said, well, if you were about to get married, maybe a year or two from now, let's say, would you be open to talking about this? Maybe. And I said, well, why are you afraid to talk about this? And he said, because I don't want her to think I'm some type of anti-woman, anti-feminist person. And so, and it just feels like we'd get into a big argument because she definitely would not agree with any of the things that I'm saying to you. And just, I felt so, and I said, well, how is it at Tamalpais High School, which is our local high school in Mill Valley, California? And he said, oh my goodness, it's much worse than it is at the all boys school. This is, I have a lot of friends at Tam High and a lot of friends at Redwood, and they all say that's even worse than what I'm hearing at my school. And so this is just, a kid pulled off the, walking by and at random. But in the meantime, when I am at a cafe or a Starbucks or whatever, and I see a bunch of high school kids together, I go over and I introduce myself and, ask them questions like this. And it just comes in unanimously. I've literally not had a male say to me, when he's in an all male group, say to me that this is not, this is different from what he learns in school. And, and so the boys, and so more than a few high school kids have told me, I really wish I wasn't born a male, because,
Wow.
it's at that level.
Wow. Wish I wasn't born a male. Yeah. I think we can see with any problem that we try to solve by labeling it a war, it often escalates the war. It often escalates what's coming back at us, and the very thing that we're complaining about with the other side only increases as we attack them. And yeah, it seems like a self-perpetuating thing. The more that we um, perpetuate the gender pay gap and complain about the patriarchy, um, the more that you're also going to get young men, a certain amount of young men saying, F you, men aren't so bad. And these are lies. You're lying. This is propaganda, And then, of course, the more that the men come back with that, the more ammunition the feminists or the women or the people on the other side have to say, see, this toxic masculinity. We got, it's just a perpetual cycle. And yeah, is that related to, do you think, a lot of women choosing to have children without a father in the home, or um, being more inclined even to divorce, or to maybe not allow the father to have as much time in the life of his children? I mean, is there a connection there?
Absolutely a connection there. I have taught couples communication workshops for the past 30 years. And the last one I did was a few weeks ago at a place called Esalen, Esalen, in Big Sur, California, which is one of the predominant retreat centers for holistic education and psychological education in the world. And in that workshop, there were 50 people, 25 couples. And three of the men, as I go, I create a whole series of exercises that involved um, the theory, the basic focus of this workshop is called Role Mate to Soulmate, is saying that historically speaking, when we heard criticism, we felt might be an enemy. So therefore, we got up our defenses so we wouldn't be killed by the enemy, or we killed the enemy before the enemy killed us. And so then that was functional for survival. It's just totally dysfunctional for love. And so I invented a way to be able to get around that biological propensity for defensiveness. And so, and I created this, which is a structure in which everybody in the class moves into a whole different set of mindsets that alters their natural propensity to be defensive and creates instead the word temporary is very strongly emphasized, a temporary feeling of being receptive to their partner's story, perspective on the world, no matter what that story is, no matter how exaggerated it is, no matter how distorted it is. But their partner is just listened to, and the criticism that goes along with it is listened to and heard, but in a way that the mindsets help each of the people hearing them understand that the more they provide a safe environment for their partner's feelings, the more their partner will feel safe and therefore more loved, and therefore love them more. So that rather than be defensive, providing that safe environment actually will increase your love and security for both of you. And there's a whole set of mindsets like that. When they're complete with those mindsets and they're centered inside, they say to their partner, okay, I want to hear what you have to say. And then there's a whole process I put them through that allows the person who's speaking and doing expressing the concern or the criticism to feel really deeply heard. So as I do this, people are really able to hear each other. But at the last workshop I did, there were three couples for whom this was not working. And so I went up to each of them, and the problem was exactly the same with all three couples. It was they were older men, in this case white men, but not necessarily white men, who had been previously married, who each of them said separately within the period of 10 or 15 minutes that they had learned in their last marriage that anytime they said what they really felt, that it was far more damaging than helpful. That it just led to the woman withdrawing, getting angry, having an affair, just doing something else, and just they felt completely unheard, and that it did more harm than good. And that they were basically walking around. Two of the three men used the word PTSD and said, I basically have a PTSD from this. And I know that because I don't trust that my wife will create a safe environment for me to be able to share whatever I really wish to share. And so So I worked with them on that, and worked with the women on being empathetic to this PTSD in the same way that you'd be empathetic to any PTSD or any disease that anybody was experiencing. And did find out just a few days ago that one of those three had just decided to get married, which was actually surprised me. But at any rate, the point of all that is exactly what you were saying about when people respond to arguments with an argument, and when people respond to anger with anger, it is it both of them, the enemy, the person responding that way, becomes very much like, in personality wise, like the enemy that they're shooting against. You become a shooter, you become an arguer, you don't see their vulnerability. And so one of the wisdoms in the class is that anger is vulnerability's mask, and that when you hear your partner being angry, it's a training. One of the trainings is to teach them to see vulnerability rather than the anger. And the flip side of that coin is, when you feel angry, to learn how to express the vulnerability rather than the anger, because your vulnerability attracts empathy, your anger attracts anger. And so, that's the core of the course. I mean, that's a little bit of one of the 23, what I call love enhancements, that I teach in the course on Rollmate to Soulmate. But the when the couples learn that, I then have a chapter called Civil War to Civil Dialogue, which is about how to take the things you learn to do to create a safe environment for your partner's feelings, and how to be able to translate them to creating a safe environment for your kids' feelings, for for somebody in the family who is a Republican when you're a Democrat, or vice versa, for someone, an employer or an employee who seems to be getting paid more from working out of home in his or her pajamas than you are having to commute to work, for people that have different perspectives than you. And so instead of the love guarantee, I replace the respect guarantee, knowing that when somebody that you disagree with politically, let's say at the worst case scenario, not the worst case scenario, but one of the options is, and then if instead of arguing what you disagree with about them, if you're first able to hear the virtues that created that perspective. So if a father and daughter are at Thanksgiving dinner, let's say, and the daughter comes, and the father's been working all his life to put his first daughter through college, let's say, and finally the daughter comes home from college and says, Dad, you're part of the patriarchy, and but I am I know that, but I've just sort of accepted that, but I'm so excited about some of the things I'm learning. Well, what are some of the things you're excited about, sweetie? Well, I'm so excited about reparations, and giving that to Black people and so on. And the dad, let's say, is a political conservative and feels that reparations are absolutely just facilitating and enabling Blacks to be more not productive. And so what I train the couples, that father and daughter, to do, is to see the virtue that maybe has gone into a vice. So for the father to say, well, I taught my daughter to have empathy, and I may not agree with the reparations solution, but I love that she's expressing empathy and feeling empathy, and she's coming from her heart. I trained her to do that, and so I teach people how to find the virtue that started the process, that maybe went too far and became a vice from the father's, in this case, the father's point of view. And then I reverse that with the daughter, and have the daughter see the virtue behind the father not wanting reparations, rather than see them as each of them, the father being a racist and the daughter being an enabler.
That's beautiful. That's very dear to my heart. I have a body of work very much related to that. Um,
Mm. Tell me about that. Your body of work related to that.
Yeah, it's honor work, and I have this particular process called the honor window. And the very simple version of it is let's say that I'm working with the daughter, with her judgments of her father. She'll start in the lower left-hand quadrant and say, "My father is too, I don't know, maybe it's racist, or it's whatever the judgment is that she wants to put down there." And you can continue to list those judgments. Then we go to the diagonal next corner, and we ask, like, what is she standing for, right? So this, in comparison to her father on this issue, she's standing for a virtue, right, or a value, or she's standing for being something. She's standing for being um, uh, fair. She's standing for being honoring of all people, or standing for being a peacemaker. Whatever it is for her. Then we go down to the lower right hand quadrant, and the prompt is, in the specific way that your father is too blank, yet you stand for being blank. Your father would say, "Yeah, maybe, but you're too blank." And this is her father's judgment of her. And then we come back over to the fourth quadrant, and this is the tough one for her to really see what her father's standing for. And this is where the magic starts happening. But yeah, it's really as if we're stuck at a certain level of development, on a lot of these issues related to the culture war, and we need to find ways not to just stop all the shaming, and going to empathy is great, and the next level, I think, is even honoring. And that might be a good next segue to our my next question, which is, what is the role of a father in a boy's life that is perhaps irreplaceable, or that's special, or that's can we honor fathers for the contribution that they have to bring to the boy's life? And this is one of those subjects that could even be taboo, because it could sound like, oh, we're shaming single mothers, or we're saying that, somehow disregarding them. We're in no way dismissing them, and how difficult that is, and the stand they're making to be who they can be for their boy. And can we honor the unique role of a father? And what
Yeah.
would you say that is?
Well, first of all, I really want to honor what you just said about the honoring process, and second, applying that to single mothers. I don't think there's between the woman I met, who I'm married to, is I met 30 years ago, but before I was married for about 11 years previously, and between marriages, I started dating a mixture of women, but I started increasingly dating mothers because they were more mature than women who had never had children. And every single mother that I dated used one word: uh, overwhelmed. She often felt that she was overwhelmed with the responsibilities of taking care of her children effectively. A few of those women were also not receiving much in child support, and they had to work, and so they felt that they weren't doing as good a job as they wanted to at work, and they weren't doing as good a job as they wanted to with their children. They felt guilty about both of those things, and overwhelmed. And so I really want to honor the woman who is a single mother for that extraordinary devotion, the juggling act that she has to deal with, the feelings of guilt, and one of the reasons I want dads involved is to take that burden and that feeling off and balance that. The raising of children is an enormous burden, and it's also an enormous gift and an enormous joy. And both mothers and fathers should be sharing that, and they should be bringing different things to the table that I'll explain in a moment. The second thing I want to be clear about is that um, the boy crisis, yes, it does reside where dads do not reside for the most part, but where dads do not reside does not predict a boy crisis. That is, many males, like both Presidents Bush and President Clinton and President Obama, they all had dad deprivation experiences, and they still became very successful men. So many men who do not who have father involvement, many of them nevertheless succeed. It's just that among the men who don't succeed, among the boys who don't succeed, there the propensity for a high percentage of them to be dad deprived is great. So I want to make those two things really clear, and that part of what we need to understand is that dad involvement needs to be seen as a women's issue, and it all both for the adult mother who deserves having an equally involved father to be able to raise children more effectively and to keep her own sanity in the process. And so this is a very, and it's also a women's issue in the sense that it's a daughter's issue. The daughters that have problems are much more likely to be dad deprived. Problems with the suicide, with drug overdose, with addictions, with not doing as well as school and not having postponed gratification and having poor social skills. All these things that are true of boys, also true of girls. Now, there's a few things that are special that with dad deprived girls, which is that dad deprived girls are much more likely to become parents as teenagers without being married, and to therefore repeat the whole cycle again. And so that whereas that doesn't, whereas the boy is likely to be have had that sexual relationship with the woman in teenage years and often disappear or not be effective as a parent. And so those are, but by and large, the deprivations for both the girl and the boy are quite overlapping, with that being somewhat of an exception. So the next question is, what do dads do that dads need to understand as well as moms? Now, the reason I wrote the Boy Crisis book was because I couldn't find in any magazines about parenting or any other books what exactly was it that dads, some were honest enough to report the data that children did a lot better with dads, but none of them told the story of um, of what is there about dads roughhousing with the kids? What is there about dads immersing the kids in nature? What is there about dads teasing the children? What is that there about dads encouraging the children to take reasonable risks? What is there about all of those examples that lead to the children doing so much better when they have that father involved? And I can't go over all seven or nine of the major differences, but I'll share one as an example. Roughhousing, and the normal male female mom dad dynamic on roughhousing, or if they're divorced, the hearing the reports of dynamic about roughhousing is, but let's say I'll give the example, mom and dad are in the same family, and there's three children, and dad goes, two boys, let's say, and a girl, and dad throws the three kids in the couch and goes, okay, kids, it's roughhousing time, and the kids go, yay, and they're so excited, and okay, here's the game tonight. The three of you jump on my back, and you three, the three of you together, see if you can pin me down before I pin the three of you down together. Okay, dad, we'll do it. And mom is looking on, and she's just going like, oh my God. I feel like I just have one more child to monitor here, and then saying some version of, I just feel inside of myself, I don't want to interfere, I don't want to be controlling, but on the other hand, I'm going to feel guilty if somebody gets hurt, and I just feel like somebody will get hurt. And there's only about a 99% chance that mom will be right. Eventually, sooner or later, somebody will get hurt. And then, okay, so the roughhousing goes on, and then somebody gets hurt, and then mom feels guilty that she didn't interfere. And I abrogated my responsibility to protect the kids, and let dad just go ahead and do all this fun stuff with them. But maybe dad will learn now because somebody has gotten hurt, just like I knew would happen. And so, but instead of dad learning, dad says, okay, there's going to be no more roughhousing if you do this again, Jimmy, if you stick your elbow in Jane's eye. And so the mom goes, okay, well, wait a minute. I thought the kids got hurt. Didn't he see that the kids got hurt? And now he's saying no more roughhousing. If that means you're going back and you're continuing the roughhousing that got the kids hurt again. Oh my God, don't you ever learn? But dad continues that. And sure enough, mom's right again. Somebody gets hurt again. And so then dad says, okay, end of roughhousing. No more roughhousing until maybe later the week. We'll see how you do your homework and other things, and we'll reevaluate it. And mom goes, okay, good. You stopped the roughhousing, but you are promising the possibility of rescheduling what ended up twice in a row in a period of, maybe an hour, leading to kids being hurt. But the next time they roughhouse, to mom's great concern, the dad gives the same message. Remember, if you're too aggressive or you hurt somebody else or somebody gets hurt, end of roughhousing. Now the kids saw that the last time dad said that's exactly what happened. They lost their roughhousing for a matter of days. So now, instead of just going ahead and pushing their brother or sister around or being aggressive rather than assertive, they know that if they are that way, dad will enforce exactly what he said he would enforce. That's boundary enforcement. Very different from boundary setting. So moms would, if they did do the roughhousing, would often set boundaries and say, you can't push too aggressively. And when the kids pushed more aggressively, the mom might say some version of, I told you before, you can't push too aggressively. And so now mom is a little bit also feeling psychologically that, why is it when I tell the kids something, I have to keep repeating it. And when dad just says it one time, maybe it's his deeper voice or something, that leads to the kids just obeying. Well, it isn't the deeper voice, because dads with not such deep voices that don't enforce boundaries don't have the kids do the exact same thing that they do with mothers. The boundary setting, like repeating something, roughhousing is too exciting to give up and not be rougher, just for the purpose of avoiding mom repeating the warning. But it's not so exciting that if the kids know they're going to lose what they really want, the roller coaster of roughhousing, that they're going to, they start learning postponed gratification. Okay, I'm going to get what I really want, the roughhousing, in exchange for the gratification of pushing my brother or sister around, and maybe hurting them. And so now they're also learning from that experience to think of somebody else's needs besides their own. So they're learning empathy. And so what the data shows about roughhousing is that it leads to empathy. But I had never heard a father, roughhousing done with boundary enforcement, like the father often does it. Father by saying, you have no option, if you want to continue the roughhousing, to consider what it takes to make your sister and brother safe. And what it takes is being assertive, yes, but not aggressive. You can fake me out by making believe that you're going to move one way rather than the other, and then take advantage of my being faked out. That's fine. But you can't push your brother or sister aside to be the winner. And so then they're also beginning to learn postponed gratification and empathy and assertiveness rather than aggressiveness. Well, if you ask when you learn to be assertive and not aggressive, you also start having more social skills. And so the combination and the postponed gratification means you complete your homework, or you do the discipline that's required for you to be on the basketball team. And so girls want winners; they don't want losers. And teachers want guys that finish their homework as well. And so the kids that get this postponed gratification and the empathy and the distinctions between assertiveness and aggressiveness, they tend to be respected more by the girls, by other boys, and by teachers, and by their own parents. The parents will be, rooting for them in a basketball game, and brother will be sitting there watching the other parent, brother that had the discipline to and the postponed gratification to do what was needed to do to make the basketball team. They'll be watching the other brother be more admired than they are. And so this is just one of the 7 to 9 major differences between dad style parenting and mom style parenting. And I'm not blaming moms for not knowing this. Women can't hear what dads don't say. And I'm not blaming dads because dads can't hear what is not out there in other books and magazines to say what I hope I said clearly in the Boy Crisis book.
Yeah, it's first of all, it's very taboo of you in this era to suggest that mothers and fathers are different, that we have basic differences, but and the fear is that we might shame, for example, mothers, for some lack here, but acknowledging differences allows us to honor each other and the
All right.
unique contributions that we
And
make.
and also be very clear that there are some fathers. I have a grandson whose father is weaker on boundary enforcement than the mother is. They're both weak on
Mm.
boundary enforcement, but he's even worse because he sees the child less, and he interprets that as I don't want to create an enemy from the child with the child, and that's of course not helping at all. And so
These some of these things that you're attributing to fathers, or perhaps all of them, through a judgmental lens, could look like toxic masculinity in some form. From the roughhousing, that could be bullying. So could teasing. Teasing could easily be misinterpreted as bullying. Encouraging risky behavior. Well, boys are already doing enough of that themselves, and sometimes that leads to bad outcomes for everybody. Um, yeah, it's as I've got some younger male friends, and I don't know if this is more of a European thing. Yeah, I don't know about that, but there's I've got some young male friends who mistake my teasing them for bullying. And I tell them, no, this is brothering, you know. Like, I come from a very large family, extended family. Teasing, roughhousing, hugging, like, this is love, this is how we share our love. And my father, his third wife, who he spent a few decades with, um, when I would go to visit my dad and hang out, we were constantly teasing each other, and one of his refrains is, when he's like talking about the basketball game that we had last night, like the drag out, one more game so the other person can get the upper hand. He would always say, they sure don't make those boys like they used to, right? In his day when they made him, right? And his wife interpreted that as him being mean to me. And she would constantly remind him and chastise him for how he was treating his son, not understanding that, like, this is love to me. Like that's the way my dad and I connect. Um, what what are the uses you see of teasing?
yes, first of all, it's really important to understand that every virtue taken to its extreme can become a vice. And that is one of the values of both sexes parenting and communicating about their parenting. So, for example, and it's what I call checks and balance parenting. So, the children who do the best are not only ones with two parents, usually, but ones with two parents communicating about what's too much teasing, and then the other parent, the dad, understanding what most dads cannot explain is what is the function of teasing to begin with. Why am I teasing? So if a dad can't even explain the positive side of teasing or listen to the mom saying when teasing has gone too far, and then them dialogue about whether if Johnny or Jane just started crying as a result of teasing, Is that too far? And so all of that is part of the dynamic. So let me paint the picture of checks and balance parenting first, and then I'll come back and take that to teasing. So checks and balance parenting can probably most easily be seen with the mother on average. And again, some of these times the mom and dad are reversed, but on average, moms will tend to be a bit more protective and dads a little bit more encouraging of risk taking. So let's say the child comes to mom and says, "Can I climb the tree in the backyard?" And mom goes, "Well, maybe in a few years, sweetie, but that tree is pretty tall and you could really fall and hurt yourself. And the ground is pretty hard this time of year, especially. And so maybe in a few years, check with me again." And the child runs to dad and says, "Dad, can I climb the tree in the backyard?" And dad says, "Well, be careful. It's a pretty big tree, but okay. But if you're really careful." And so mom looks out the back window and goes, "What? I just told the kid that she or he could not climb that tree. What's they do? What are they doing? Jane, I told you couldn't climb the tree. Well, dad said it was okay." And so yeah, dad gets called in. And a good checks and balance parenting would go something like this. I don't want that child climbing the tree because she or he could get hurt. The dad would know enough to say that a certain amount of risk taking is helpful because it increases a child's IQ. What? Risk taking, like climbing a tree, increases a child's IQ? This is hard data. And why is that? Because taking a risk forces the brain to assess what is too much of a risk and what is not. It forces the brain out of the comfort zone. Different synapses connect. But I've never heard a dad say to a mom, I want the child to increase his or her IQ. I want the child to assess what risk is safe and what risk isn't safe. So checks and balance parenting might take that to the next step and say, okay, I see, I never thought of that, didn't know that, but that requires the dad to be informed about the values of what he does, or would tend to encourage. And then the two negotiate a compromise. For example, saying, okay, the child can, Jimmy or Jane, whatever, can climb so far up that tree, but those branches at the top are new and they're too fragile, and that's not okay. And this branch here looks like it's already cracked. So we have to make sure that she or he doesn't go there. Well, who's going to do that? You're going to do that. If you want the child to climb the tree, you're going to be out underneath the tree. And by the way, oftentimes when you're out when you're watching your iPhone, you're not really focused. So if you agree to give me the iPhone, you go out under the tree while Jimmy or Jane climbs the tree, and to make sure you cushion the fall in case there is a fall. Then the child gets the best of both worlds. They're assessing risks. They're being able to. They're having the fun of climbing the tree. They're knowing what's safe, learning what's safe and not safe, but they're getting some protection. So that would be an example of checks and balance parenting, and where the child gets a win-win. The mom and dad both get the best of each other's offers. Take that with teasing. So normally speaking, teasing is very complex. As you inferred from your dialogue, is that what we guys implicitly understand is that the commerce of masculinity is the trading of wit-covered put-downs. So when you tease your son or daughter, teasing is like a fruit smoothie with wheatgrass in it. When you tease, you may want to criticize, which is the wheatgrass, your son for maybe doing something that was mean to the daughter, let's say. And so you say, big meanie there. You think you're a bigger boy if you're mean, huh? Well, I can be a big meanie too. Stand up and be a big meanie, and that type of thing. And the kid starts laughing, and sees that it's being mocked. But on the other hand, sort of gets the point about you were just mean to your sister. So the fruit smoothie, the wheatgrass was, I noticed that you were mean to your sister. But instead of punishing you or getting you, I am letting you see in my exaggerated mode that that's the fruit smoothie. It's going to taste good going down, but you're going to get the point. But let's say that child has never been teased before and has grown up maybe with a single mom who has always been nurturing and caring, and the response there was, sweetie, treat your big sister more carefully, don't be mean. And that's also a good way of having that outcome. But in this case, if that child has not been teased before, when he hears the tease, he's likely to start crying. And the mother will then say, "Oh, you are so mean. You created the child crying." And so if the father eventually explains what the purpose of teasing is to help impart in a way, in a fun way, something that's a criticism that will allow the child to be able to hear that criticism more easily, that sits better with the mom. But let's say then the mom takes that to heart and she goes ahead and teases her son at one point or her daughter at one point. What's likely to happen is the child will cry. Whereas if the dad did it, the child won't cry. And so moms will say to me, "Well, how is that? I did the same thing that dad did. I think I even did it even more gently, and my son or daughter cried when I did it, but didn't cry when dad did it." And the reason is that when you're with dad, the child is used to hearing teasing language. It's part of the communication system between the father and the girl or the daughter or the son. Whereas mom, when she teases, it feels like a criticism because the language of mother has the child is used to it being protective and caring, and that when they have a concern, they speak in a caring way about that concern, or if it's not paid attention to, they start yelling, but they don't do it through teasing. And so mom has to get the child used to teasing as part of the language that the child is used to having from the mom in order for it to be effective. I explain this in much greater depth in the Boy Crisis book, but that gives you some, I think, understanding of the dynamic that can sometimes lead to misunderstandings. And so the big headline is there. Yes, every virtue taken to its extreme becomes a vice. And B, teasing has a function, and we see this like in fraternities. There's hardly any fraternity that doesn't, where the guys don't mock each other. And so what's the purpose of all this stupid stuff that guys seem to be doing? The commerce of masculinity, the trading of wood-covered put-downs, that is our way of training each other as boys to become successful, because you cannot become successful if you can't handle being put down. I could not write what I write if I couldn't handle being criticized by a certain percentage of people. If I said, okay, I'm going to make this less clear, more namby-pamby, more this or that, I would I'd lose my ability to communicate some of these things, but I'd also, I would not be able to have ever done this if I didn't know how to handle the criticism that was the put downs that were part of my growing up experience.
Yes, as I've traveled the world the last 14 years, I've noticed that I don't know the increased. I don't want to say sensitivity, but it's almost like a lot of the younger male generation in the Western world has kind of taken the mom point of view as far as things like roughhousing and teasing and excessive politeness or not. And it's these guys who tend to have trouble connecting with just men in so many other cultures, because it's like there's a way that you just bond with men in other cultures, and it could be with insults. There's that movie with Clint Eastwood, Gran Torino, and he goes into the barbershop, and there's everyone of every ethnicity there, and they're all using slurs against each other and talking the whole time, and it's just that's their way of it's that's their way of bonding. And
And so
yeah,
it's
it's yeah.
important. It's important to understand that bonding has a purpose, and that purpose is um, if I'm a firefighter and a new person comes in as a firefighter, and I mock him, um, and he takes it, and he laughs with it and plays with it and mocks me back a little bit, but not out of anger. Um, versus somebody who starts either crying when he's mocked or gets angry, or gets vicious, or comes back in some fierce, out of proportion, disproportionate way. Um, and if that person is what might be called a prima donna when they're mocked and they can't handle it, I'm not going to trust that person if there's a roof falling down, and I'm almost that's not the type of person, the one who's really concerned about his or her feelings. That's going to be willing to risk his or her life coming in to save me and drag me out. And so guys realize that the type, if you can't take a joke, and you can't be teased, you're probably more sensitive than what it takes to be able to deal with life of being a firefighter, a police officer, or in all the hazardous professions. You see this, or among successful men. Successful men can laugh at and mock each other and put each other down, and the challenge then becomes, what I talk about a lot in the Boy Crisis book, is the challenge then with when a woman in the workplace does not understand this, being put down. If you go over to a woman in the workplace and you go over to a man in the workplace and you put your hand on his belly and go, "Huh, getting a little weight there, huh?" Pretty soon you look like you're pregnant. And um, and the guy will laugh, and that'll be a test of him being able to sort of get the fruit smoothie of the criticism with a playfulness. If he goes over to a woman at the office and says, "Oh, I meant you're gaining a little weight there," uh, you know, she'll report that to HR. HR
Yeah.
will see that as a clear sign of being discriminating against women, as opposed to the clear sign of discriminating against women is only doing that with men and not doing that with women. And the problem with HR and most companies and government agencies is that it's not HR, it's not human resources, it is HER. It's her perspective. And that her perspective then leads to that man being fired for doing something that is really inclusive of the women, bringing her into the social circle, as opposed to exclusive, because nobody understands these things. And so because it's not it's we're interpreting with hostility and anger, usually toward men, what needs to be communicated between men and women, to have both of us understand, including the men, understand that maybe the woman could be communicated with about something negative in a different way, in a way that's more her way of handling it. So the teasing and the wood covered put downs are not the only answer, but they're the first step of being explained as something that needs to be communicated with between the sexes, rather than just one sex blamed.
Yeah, it's this thing that's happening in the corporate world like that. It's also happening in our school cultures and in our mainstream culture at large. And I mean, it could be a factor of men also saying, to hell with school. This isn't an environment for me. Um, when when I was young, I had a job as a banquet waiter in these large hotels, and it was largely Mexican staff, and then there'd be a few oddballs like me, and the men and the women self segregated into the men's group, and we did the heavy lifting stuff and whatever in preparing these big banquet halls, and women, arranged the flowers, and they did all the the things that the women do, and they thought it was so weird that I would go hang out with the women and come back and hang out with the men and back and forth, that the women called me brother, hermano, because men wouldn't do this, like, unless it was her brother or something. And, in Mexico and a lot of like Latino culture, like I think Native American culture, their way of of being inclusive is they give you a name based on how you're different, and that's just the way you're different. Now we all know it, we all laugh at it, and that's actually the way you're included, because you have a name signifying how you're different, and we're all different. And I was actually reading a Native American book, well, a book about the Comanche fascinating book. But in the Comanche tribe, there are a few examples given. The Comanche raid this group of white settlers, and it's brutal. They slaughtered the family. They take the girl and ride her back to the Comanche camp, and it's a long ride, and when she gets to the camp and settles in, she becomes one of the Comanche, but her name becomes while riding horses, because they thought that was so funny that she while riding the horse. So like that's her name in the group for the rest of her life. And one of the chief's names translates to erection that won't go down. So he must have had an interesting day one time, and he got that name. And I just imagine their community must have been just full of laughs, because I mean, you can imagine calling for the chief by name, right? So, um, yeah, it's been fascinating to me to see how America is trying to create some kind of togetherness, in what could be said as a more female oriented way. Um, and different cultures do it differently, and it doesn't seem to be working in America in so many ways.
It certainly is, every, as you heard me say before, every virtue taken to its extreme becomes a vice. And I think it's wonderful that we're trying to be inclusive, and wonderful that we understand the difference between equality and equity, and wonderful that we seek diversity. And it's become, though, such politically correct, hard stream thinking, that it's very, very, it's just not understanding. We're not inclusive of men, just like the White House Gender Policy Council. When you were sharing your story, it reminded me of something that I hadn't thought of for a long time. But when I was in fifth grade, I had a girlfriend, and my first girlfriend, and she would do jump rope every day with all the girls, and all the guys would go down and play soccer. And so I would play soccer for half of the time, and then go up and I was the only guy that would go up and do jump rope with her and the girlfriends. And so I got that same type of reputation of, like, but I must say that the guys didn't mock me for it at that time. A few sort of looked a little bit askance, and the girls loved it, and my girlfriend super loved it. But it was interesting how maybe even as early as fifth grade, I was doing some version of what I'm still doing now. So
Yeah, yeah. You've done a great share of standing up for women, and also men. And we need a hell of a lot more than that. And I think that's a role that we need to revivify, is that of an elder, the one who can say, "Hey, wait, we're all family here, brother, sister. We all belong." And yeah, it can bring us together. And I see in your speaking, even in this interview, you're taking care to make sure that single mothers are not being left out. That we're not saying this, and we're including everybody. We're standing for all of us, and that's really beautiful. And I wonder if, in closing, you could maybe speak to the man who is sun deprived. Maybe he's maybe cut off in some ways, or disconnected in some ways from his son, and maybe just take a moment and, I don't know, whatever you might have to say to him, or counsel him.
yes, very good. Thank you for asking that. First of all, I want to honor you for bringing up the whole concept of sun deprived. Because this is something that has broken the heart of so many men that I hear from, and also daughter deprived. When a father is cut off from the daughter or the son that he loves, and he's trying everything he can to be connected. This is it often breaks his heart. I have had more than one father write me that until I read the Boy Crisis, I was ready to commit suicide, because I just saw no hope whatsoever. But the answer doesn't really start with the Boy Crisis. The answer starts with um, doing what you were talking about before, and that what we were both talking about is starting to by honoring the mother's, find the honoring of the mother's side, search for what she contributes, let her know what you honor about her. And as a don't put the focus for a while on her being horrible, for bad mouthing you, cutting you off. It's as we were talking about earlier, the more you shoot back and get equal, the more the problem is created. The more you take a step of talking about what the mother does that you appreciate, whatever that is, and you search to find it, and you're very not general about it, but very specific about it, and chop it into 5 or 6 different little pieces, each of which can be seen as an appreciation. A woman, one bouquet of flowers is really great, but 12 flowers, one given at a time, 12 times, has much more impact. And so start with that. Start with going, before you get into the boy crisis issue per se, go to the part of my website that is on couples communication. Take get a hold of the couples communication course that I do. It's very inexpensive. It'll cost you much less than a fraction of what a lawyer will cost you, or what I would cost you in different circumstances. And so, and even if your your ex-wife will not participate in that with you, review it by yourself, and then find out what there is in there that your wife would appreciate hearing about, what represents something that you didn't understand that you understand better. And then she's far more likely to do that course with you. And the course then will help you communicate more effectively. Focus on getting the communication better, and then the connection with your son or your daughter is far more likely to roll out from that than it will fighting directly for your son or your daughter.
Powerful. Yeah. Dr. Warren Farrell, thank you so much for your time, and especially thank you for the stand that you've made for men, especially as we've often haven't had the words to identify what the challenges are and figure out how to communicate for ourselves and figure out how to bridge these gaps, between mother and father, and to have families work. Thank you on behalf of all the men listening as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for making all this effort to make this happen and put all the thinkers in this area together and create something for people to watch, not just in the next few months, but for years afterwards. That's a major contribution.
Yes. All right. Where can people find you online?
WarrenFarrell.com is my is my website. And then if you wish to email me, just do Warren@WarrenFarrell.com. I answer every single email.
That's incredible. Yes. All right, sir. Have yourself a great day. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for your work and your wonderful way of asking questions and listening real well.